Hello, everyone. Welcome back. Good to see you. We're doing a quick, just kind of uh, president has coronavirus kind of thing. Kevin texted me last night and said, "Hey, do you want to do something about Trump getting COVID?" I was like, "Well, I'm about to pass out, actually, but here are some quick thoughts. We can do something tomorrow." So here we are. Thanks for joining us. And we kind of talked a little bit before, and really, what we're not trying to, as Kevin told me on the phone earlier, we're not in the predictions game of, this isn't about, will he die or some morbid stuff like that, but just what we think the general implications this is going to have on things. And maybe even just, I've been thinking about just some observations I'm making in what's going on kind of socially, even just over the past maybe 12 hours and how that, where does that fall into other trends and stuff we've seen. So it's not going to be super long, but just wanted to kind of get some thoughts out there. Kevin, why don't you go ahead and start just kind of what were some of your first kind of knee-jerk impulse kind of thoughts whenever you were processing this? Because usually we think about things, so you get a piece of information and then you ask questions and then your mind starts to answer those questions. That's kind of how that association works. We tell ourselves stories to understand things. And it's kind of unavoidable. So what were some of the stories, what were some of the thoughts that were popping into your head whenever you first saw that news last night?
Yeah, so like most things, I have a Yahoo notification on my phone, and that's how I get most of my initial notifications. Yahoo actually does a good job at notifying you quickly. I don't really read any of their material because it's not particularly good, but it's good at least getting the information quickly. So I kind of compared this to when we first heard Boris Johnson got it, and back then I was like, there are a lot more unknowns about this thing. I really felt for, oh man, I hope he ends up staying safe and pushing through it and surviving. And although he's relatively young, I want to say he's still in his 40s or something like that. He's, seems like knowing what we know now, he's going to be able to relatively easily fight through it. When I saw the one from Trump, my initial thing was, of course, like, oh man, I hope he's safe. I hope him and the first lady are doing well and comfortable. But after that, it was more like a political assessment, I guess. I don't think he's going to, again, not going in the prediction game. I think he'll be okay. Like he's got the best doctors around him. He's got, um, he's going to have everything he needs to fight it the best he can. But still hopes and prayers for both of them. Anyone involved who's been in contact with him, Hope Hicks, or anyone who may have contracted. It doesn't seem like anyone did in the Biden campaign, but also, I'd be more frightened if Biden got it than I would be Trump in
Yep.
terms of their health. But either way, no one wants this to happen. And Biden did a great job of what he should have done. Came out immediately and said, we're praying for you guys. We hope
Yep.
everything is okay. And now it just came out that him and his wife tested negative for it, so they seem to be doing okay. But still, it kind of directed me toward the political end of it. And I'm trying to think, how is this going to play on each side? We just had a debate. Debate did not go, in your and my opinion, did not go particularly well for Trump. And also, what is this going to help him? Is this the next news story that's going to kind of turn us off the debate and turn us on to something else and move us forward? Or is it they're going to highlight something back in there and keep the debate, at the top of the news? And already you're starting to see him, making fun of Biden, saying, I see him on TV. He's wearing a mask. He's 200 feet away from all these people wearing a mask. And people are pointing out like that's hypocrisy. And it's like, well, no, it's like it is silly wearing a mask. Open virtue signaling. Now we have like a governor of some state, I don't remember what it was, getting caught on a hot mic saying she is actually, it's political theater is the only reason she's got a mask on because she's nowhere near anyone
Well,
else.
that was a Democrat that was making
Yeah,
that statement, if I recall.
yeah, it was. Um, and it doesn't make sense. If you're in the middle of a baseball field like Fauci was, putting on a mask is just silly. And then you're in the stands next to four other people with it under your chin. It's like, well, okay, we kind of know what we're seeing here. But people are still pointing this out and saying, well, it's not about, you actually physically protecting yourself. It's about the image on TV that you're projecting to people sitting, in their living room saying, I should wear a mask more often. It's kind of like their messaging thing, trying to say, his messaging was horrible on this, and which I don't think it was. I think he's, Ben Shapiro pointed out today, it's like his messaging isn't bad necessarily, but it's just all over the place sometimes. And because he's got so many sound bites out there, the media just gets to pick and choose whichever one they want to use that day and use it against him. So, a lot of people, a lot of the blue check marks on Twitter are going out there saying awful things and saying he basically deserves this. A lot of people are trying to say he's trying to push off accountability on Hope Hicks because, they think that she might have been the one who kind of brought it in. And, I'm sure she feels awful, but they're trying to say that as him pushing off accountability on someone else, which I don't really see that being the case. Maybe I'm wrong, but so there's a whole bunch of political elements to this, much more than the health elements that we're starting to see play out. And that was to me, like last night when I texted you, I'm like, I want to discuss that because I think this might change the landscape a little bit and maybe not at all. I don't know. Maybe it's not a huge event. A lot of people are coming out, especially on the right, saying, he's going to be fine. This is not something to freak out about, but it will be played in the media, and it's going to be interesting how it's going to be done that way.
Yeah. My initial thought was, if he recovers quickly, that it will change nothing, like literally nothing. And what I mean is, I think he would play it off, and one thing I did have, so I can give some quick just thoughts of what I think the short-term implications are, so the question is, how serious is it? And if it's super serious, well, then there's nothing really further to speculate about. But if it's not and he recovers, so there's the next debate, which is in 2 weeks. So will he have the energy to do that? I don't know. The recovery for this, people, it can be really long, drawn out process, or it can be totally fine. I think I told you that my grandma, or my wife's grandma, so whatever, grandma-in-law, whatever, she's in her early 70s, and she got it, didn't even know that she had it. The only way she found out is because she was going for a dental appointment, and they tested her, and she tested positive, and she's like, I didn't even know that I had it. And so we know that these things happen. So let's just assume that he falls into the statistical, let's say all probabilities, and that he's probably fine, mild symptoms and fine.
Yeah, he's in the 95%. He'll be completely okay.
Yeah. So for the next debate, I could see them doing an arguing that it needs to be virtual or whatever. They're already talking about changing the format. So if they do that, then you're going to have someone, really, they're already talking about being able to shut off mics to, so that people can answer specifically, which, by the way, isn't something I think is necessarily a bad thing.
No.
I don't think it's about shutting off the
real
mic.
Quick.
What?
Well, real quick, did you see the last episode of South Park? So they played it on there, not politically, but about the teacher controlling Zoom, and he's like punishing the students. Well, actually, it ended up being the teachers who talk over each other by saying, "Boom, I'm going to mute you all." I see that being the debate. The moderators get mad, like, "Boom, mute. This is what you get."
Well, I think there's a way to do that where it's not the moderator shuts it off, but you have this amount of time and your mic shuts off when your time expires. I think that would be a much better way to do it because it makes it about the system and not the moderator. So it doesn't create tensions between the moderator and the people. But this is what will happen at this time period. My hand's not on it. I can be like this the whole time and your time can expire. So I think there's a way to do that right. I'm not saying they will, but they're already talking about changing that format anyway. And so I could see them make an argument for it to be virtual. They do that. Then now it's Biden's going to have his teleprompter there and he's going to be doing all this other stuff, which may or may not be true. Again, his answers were really bad last time, but he still performed fine, without that. So anyway, so I think there's that. The other thought that I had was, so if Trump had it and he debates Biden and Biden didn't get it, even though neither of them were wearing a mask, I could see that being turned into an argument for in-person voting, where people would say, well, look, they socially distanced. Imagine if they're both wearing a mask. Like, it'd be another tangible example of them saying Biden didn't get it. No one up there got it from him. So they socially distanced and they presumably wore masks when they weren't. So that means that you can go out and vote in person. I could see that. I don't know if that'll be part of it, but I could see that argument being made because it's a really tangible and, current example of that. So those are the kind of the things I think about how it'll change the landscape. Obviously, the whatever topics were chosen for the VP debates next week, I think this will be folded into that quite a bit, and they'll probably make a lot of the debate about Mike Pence having to defend Donald Trump's behavior, for what him being reckless and not leading on this or something like that, and him getting it, and Kamala Harris comparing it with Joe Biden, who didn't get it. So I imagine that'll change that kind of landscape. But really beyond that, I don't really see, if I'm looking forward and I'm thinking, again, if you follow the probabilities, I don't think it's going to change a lot. I don't think it'll humble Trump the way he needs to be humbled. I could see, again, it impacting the format a little bit, but I think for him, I just can't. I think he'll use it as not as a way to gain sympathy, but as a way to show, look how, tough I am. If it goes the way statistically ought to. So those are kind of my thoughts, really just thinking about the immediacy. I have some other thoughts about how this fits into some other general societal trends, but that's kind of, I don't know if you have any thoughts on anything what I said, but.
Well, I mean, here's the question outside of the health thing. Does this, assuming he recovers and he's okay in the 14 days, which is funny because it kind of his quarantine will end the morning of the debate, which is pretty crazy. So and Biden has a legit reason to be like, I'm doing this. I don't want to do it or push it or do it via Zoom or Skype or whatever. So he's got a valid excuse, and sorry, you can't argue against him on that.
I don't know how hard it'd be for them to put up a piece of plexiglass on the stage, or you know what I mean? So anyway.
Yeah, maybe. But what I'm thinking here is again, assuming he recovers just fine, does this score political points for him? Does it score political points for Biden? Or I guess another way to ask this question, interchange Biden with Mitt Romney, someone that's more likable to the left. If this would have happened to him and he's the presidential candidate, would he have scored political points just because they think he might earn a little bit more sympathy from the mainstream media because he doesn't bash them constantly? Not saying they don't deserve it, but what does this, can this or earn political points from either side, really?
Well, I mean, that was kind of what I texted you last night, that, I said, I thought that the media would say, and the left would say, that this is what he deserves, that he wouldn't get any sympathy from them, but that I thought Biden would probably handle it well, and say, what the phrase is always, we wish them a safe and speedy recovery or something like that. And so, it's not awesome that you can kind of safely predict really toxic behavior, but that is what has happened, right? So the media and the left, by and large, have been, pretty atrocious on this. And so, I think there's two things here. One is, to your first question, if Trump was more likable, would they, if he wasn't who he was, would the responses be more sympathetic and more compassionate? Yeah, I think absolutely they would be. I don't even think that's a question. Of course,
I would say, would it boost him in the polls at all, like through sympathy points that way? I don't think he's going to get it himself.
If the media had not, so I think a lot of this is tied to, increasingly more and more the big boogeyman that's coming up for me is the legacy media and the model that they use for communicating information as a business model. But I think if it's been so ingrained in people's minds for the last 6-7 months that he doesn't take this seriously. And I don't agree. I think, whenever he said it's not that he's handled the mask thing poorly, he's just been all over the place. Well, the fact that he's been all over the place is why he handled it poorly. I think that, now, I'm not saying that it would matter if he did give a nuanced approach the entire time. So the media would still cover it dishonestly, but he has not given a nuanced approach this entire time. And he does have some justification. It's one of those things where, he can say, the experts weren't even consistent on this. Like, what are you talking about? But he wasn't in lockstep with them as they began to shift. And so I think that, part of that perception of him not taking it seriously, he brought it himself. Now, again, I don't think all of it is. In fact, I think most of it is ginned up crap by the media. But because of that, I really, the thing that comes to my mind is that, it's unique to him. If he was someone more likable, if there wasn't a very strong argument that he hadn't been taking it seriously, then I think he would get more sympathy. Whereas a lot of people are seeing this as a form of karma, him getting what he deserves, that kind of thing. And so, I think to your question, to put a fine point on it, to your question, yeah, because of who he is getting a response unique to Donald Trump. Some of that he brought on himself, but with some of the mask stuff, especially at the beginning. And some of it, and in fact, most of it probably isn't warranted. But regardless of the reasons behind it, yes, the response is unique to him. Now, here's the other part that I think is a little bit more concerning. Like I said just a second ago, it's not great that we can safely predict really toxic and destructive behavior as a just kind of a general response, as the rule and not the exception, right? Biden's response is the exception. Rachel Maddow's response is the exception. The rule has, in these kinds of things, is to assume it's going to be really unnecessarily caustic and malicious kind of response. And one of the things I told you on the phone was, we saw a little bit of a primer for this when Trump's brother died, right? The wrong Trump died, and he was, treated really horribly as a result of that. And so, from my mind, the broader issue isn't that there is a response that's unique to Trump, but the broader issue is that the degree in which it's unique to Trump is not the degree in which it's malicious or uncaring. In other words, so here's a neutral response, here's a negative response, and here's Trump's response, the response that they would get for him being Trump. Even if he wasn't him, it would still be this negative response, I think, generally as a rule. I don't think it'd fall into the realm of, sympathy and compassion and so on and so forth. And so, to me, that really more points to the broader issue of, our super polarized, like, it's so inflamed that the knee-jerk reaction is to demonize, is to say the wrong Trump died, and just to say really vitriolic and horrific things just because it's the normal response. And that's what's incentivized, I think, a lot of ways. The other part is sympathy and compassion aren't incentivized. They are not rewarded. And so I think because they're not rewarded in this current, like, super hyper-partisan milieu, then it's going to be, this is what you're going to get. So I think part of the response is unique to Trump. It would have been negative anyway, maybe just not as much so. And that's the real issue there, is that it would have been negative anyway. And that kind of speaks again to where our social, the trajectory of where we're at from a societal standpoint. And I'll kind of end it here. The thought that popped into my head is just this concept of dignity and human dignity is really, like, expressing and acknowledging general human dignity really seems to be falling out of fashion with people that you disagree with. I remember, well, not necessarily a specific one. There has been some specific cases, but, even though I don't like Ilhan Omar, for example, whenever people, tweet really racist and horrific things at her, it really pisses me off because she's a human being. And there are a lot of people that are like that with, Donald Trump or whoever, where there is it's like the rules are different for how much dignity I'm going to acknowledge that you have based on whether or not you're on my team. It's become kind of subjective. And that is the broader issue in my mind, is the fact that we are, seeing a subjective application of compassion and dignity and the things that are just really basic humanity in terms of, and what is required for a functioning society, really. And so I guess that's the the thing that concerns me a little more. That it doesn't surprise me what the reactions. Like, I only barely read any of the tweets that were responses to him or to them and other stuff, just because I know what I'm going to find there. You know, you read a few and you're like, yep, that's what I expected. You know, I expect this to be awful. And, you know, that shouldn't be the expectation, you know, but it is. And expectations usually come from somewhere. It's because it's what we've been kind of conditioned to expect. So anyway, that's kind of a lot. So there's the political specifics, and then there's the broader social stuff. You can, you know, grab whichever one of those balls you want to run with, but those are kind of my general thoughts.
So I would say about the political side, I completely agree with you how it would be treated. Even if it was a Romney type character, there'd be a lot more sympathy there, but you know it would still be angled in a certain direction to say he did something bad or this is coming from a bad place, and that's extremely sad, I think. When it comes to like his erratic response to the kind of COVID pandemic starting at the beginning, I don't like I said, I don't think his response was necessarily bad. It was erratic, but guess what? The experts' responses were erratic. He just vocalized his too solidly, basically. Every single, I mean, a good expert says we don't know, but this is where we're seeing the trend move. Whereas a politician is like, yes, this is where what we know now. This is fact. Let's all do this thing. And he did too much of that along the way, and that's why they can point at all these different directions he went. Where in reality, I think he was just as consistent as all the experts. He just voiced it in a way that, I mean, he voiced it in a way that Donald Trump would voice it. So you know, you have that trade off with his personality when it comes to trying to set the tone for any given subject, any given day. But that works to the advantage of the media because they get to pick and choose sound bites, and that'll hurt him. But yeah, when it comes from you know a response from sympathy, I don't. I don't want to put this in a way that it seems like Joe Biden is insincere with what he put on Twitter. I think he's completely sincere. I think he's truthfully praying for him. You know, I don't want to say he's not, but also that was a great political, you know, I'm not gonna say attack, political response. He put God in there on purpose. One, because I do think he's praying for him, and two, you can win over some evangelicals who are like, I don't probably wouldn't vote for Democrats just because I believe that their platform doesn't believe in God, but clearly Biden's a man of God, so I'm more open to someone who's going to at least you know invite God openly on Twitter in public and proclaim, I believe in God, and I really hope that through whatever power you think He manifests Himself in, it will help you get through this illness. So I think it was a smart, strategic move on his part, and just politically savvy. So I think him showing empathy sincerely, and him showing empathy as kind of a virtue signal. Not all virtue signals are necessarily bad, but putting it out there really helps him politically as well. And most of the big actual people in the spotlight right now, I think, did a good job at responding. I think it was only like Rashida Tlaib is the only one who kind of put a cruddy response up. I don't quite remember what it was, but it was basically like you got what you deserved kind of thing. But I mean, you're going to get that, you know, from a couple of people, but that's what the media is going to be able to do. It's like, well, you're just pointing at the crazies who responded to Trump this way. And it's like, well, you know, it is a symptom of our current culture. You know, a lot of people say Twitter is just a cesspool or a dumpster fire, which I call it that all the time, but it's only a dumpster fire because our culture is trending that way. I think Twitter amplifies some of the bad aspects of our culture that we should really learn to work on. You see all these responses by people with, you know, no avatar. They feel comfortable saying that because no one knows their real identity. But that really kind of shows you what the people actually think when they don't have to worry about the personal pushback. I mean, there's some incentives from social media that allow people to just troll effectively, but also it does show kind of what the average person thinks sometimes. And it just means we're really, really, you know, divided in today's culture a little bit too much, and it kind of shows you, you know, politics has always been a death sport kind of thing, or a blood sport, but now it's like the people are kind of fighting with each other more than just the politicians. I think Trump is kind of just a stand-in for, you know, the redneck who always votes Republican kind of thing. You know, if you saw, if a poll would come out and saying, you know, people, white, straight males in the South are disproportionately affected from this virus, you know, I think you would see a lot of applause from people on Twitter for that. And I think Trump is a little bit of a stand-in in that way. And I'm just trying to use this as a way to say, you know, it's amplifying some of the horrible things that are happening in our culture right now, and it's extremely sad to see. I don't know how we can best remedy this. You'd hope a pandemic like this would humble us, kind of like a 9/11 effect, where it kind of bring us together instead of separating us. But it's kind of torn us apart real quick. And you saw it sort of at the beginning. There really wasn't that grace period of us kind of sticking together, maybe like a week or something like that. But then where it's getting pulled apart even more, and the more we prolong this thing with a whole other slate of issues that come with having this weird change to our social culture, is going to have these really volatile changes, and we're starting
Yeah.
to see it manifest in a way, in a response to a politician. It's like, respect the presidency. I don't really care if it happened to Obama. I despise the guy, but I would never even think of anything, wanting the bad to happen to him or his wife or anything like that.
Yeah, COVID has, I think, the best metaphor that or not metaphor, but best explanation I've heard is when it's been described as pressing fast forward on a lot of things that were already taking place. So, COVID and the lockdowns and everything about it, everything about COVID, it pressed fast forward on social divisions. It pressed fast forward on businesses, that whether or not they would succeed or fail. It pressed fast forward on media, just dishonesty and people understanding it and them going down their partisan rabbit holes. It pressed fast forward on, ties that were already weakening, think EU kind of stuff. It pressed fast forward on Middle East peace, I think, in some ways. There was, as the Middle East continues to secularize, it's going to only make more sense for those, kinds of agreements to happen. So I think it pressed fast forward on a lot of things. And one of those things is the trajectory of our, kind of social zeitgeist, not zeitgeist, not the right word, the way in which our society just kind of acts, and the trends of how we treat each other and our migration patterns and stuff. So political migration, siloing off into echo chambers, physical migration, people moving a lot, moving back home and whatever. So you're seeing some more of that migration taking place. And so even the migration of different economies, I think we're seeing more of that was kind of fast forwarded because of COVID. And so I think that really those kind of reactions, despite the fact there are some people who said the politically correct thing, and I'm not talking about politically correct as in PC, but just the thing that was, smart politically. I think with Biden,
Politically
sometimes,
savvy.
yeah, savvy, and but that's kind of one of those things where it's like, well, good. The politically savvy thing also happened to be the right thing. So, whatever. I'm going to assume that they did the right thing because it's the right thing, pretty much across the board. So, but either way, it's also like, this isn't the reason why we can safely predict really vitriolic and just corrosive responses to this is because it really just makes sense. And what I mean is, as has been pointed out, as it's been said many times, many ways, right? That if you just jump to the most hyperbolic possible, over the top explanation and label and demonizing of someone, you just have nowhere to go from there. That's the Joker. Never start with the head. You got to work. You got to build to it. But the way that they've talked about Trump, for the last several years, as a dictator, as a fascist, as a all these other things. I mean, of course you're going to not have any sympathy for that person or for their supporters or anything like that. After so many years of just hearing them kind of, just whittling away at their humanity and so on and so forth. And so, I think that there is a distinction in how, that kind of the left thinks the right is evil and the right thinks the left is stupid. Those are actually really meaningful distinctions. And I think they're also pretty accurate in a lot of ways. If you think someone's stupid, you're not going to listen to them. You're likely to belittle them in a lot of ways. But it does a different thing. Like if I think someone's stupid, I'm going to be like, I do not want you driving the car. Like, there's a lot of decisions I don't want you to make if I think you're stupid, and I'm going to feel comfortable talking down to you. But that's not the same. Like it doesn't do the same in your psyche as saying you're evil. that you are evil, that you are antithetical to anything good and moral and true, that you are a real threat because of, the stained nature of your soul. And so I think that all of this actually just makes perfect sense. One thing I noticed kind of at the beginning, right after he was elected, and it was kind of one of the things where I was kind of asking questions and going, okay, well, what's going on here that influenced some of my ideological evolution, was that a lot of the comments that were made about the president and his supporters were kind of made on the periphery. So it'd be like, can you believe he said this and this and this and this and this? And then kind of the follow-up comment, it might be, the periphery, the kind of side remark, that afterthought might be, that's kind of racist, it makes him sound racist. Or, that makes him sound like a misogynist or whatever. And that kind of, it kind of started with some analysis that may or may not have been honest, but the analysis was there, and that kind of followed up with, that's, how it seems, this guy, kind of he seems a little bit fascistic. But as we've progressed, there has been a shorter and shorter distance between whatever thing you have a problem with and the character attack, to where that is now what is led with. It's like the fascist is at it again, and let's tell you why. The Nazi is at it again, let's tell you why. The racist is at it again, let's tell you why. And so those kinds of, that hyperbole and ad hominem has went from the periphery, and as it was accepted and reinforced, it has moved to the center. And, it's not just him. That's one thing I've tried to explain to people that are still heavily on the left and have all these thoughts about Donald Trump, where I'm like, okay, that's fine. We can have those conversations, but understand what you're saying about the people that just disagree with your policies and voted for him. Like, what you're saying about a really big portion of the country, that's really unhealthy to reinforce those kinds of things in your own mind. And so, it's, my main point is that it just shouldn't be surprising. Like that's the thing I think I've told you before. And I keep having these where it's like, I'm astounded, but I'm not surprised. Like my sensibilities, my human sensibilities are just blown away by some of those just really immoral and terrible things, especially that I see in the way that the legacy media portrays things or will word things, where it's just, I'm not desensitized to just how egregious it is yet. It still shocks those sensibilities, but intellectually, I'm not surprised by it. Like if someone said, do you think the media will say this kind of, horrible statement and give me some adjectives, tomorrow? Do you safely think they will? I'd say, yeah, I think so. That's a safe bet, but it still surprises me every single time. But it's not good that intellectually we can predict that. But again, it's just, it is actually the most logical response based on kind of what they've been conditioned and what people have been conditioned and fed and bought into. And it's really, really, really disastrous. And so that's another one of those things where I'm like, what is the pressing fast forward going to do there in terms of our social fabric? I make no, I'm not very cagey about where I think we're going societally. So, but I think this is just kind of one more example of that. But yeah, it's really concerning, man. But I don't think I think if anything, it's going to hurt him. I think it's going to hurt him politically, because all the people who are going to go, well, you brought this on yourself and all this other stuff, and look at you, where they're going to treat him really poorly for that. And they'll justify it to themselves. Because acknowledging the dignity of people you disagree with and extending compassion and grace to people you disagree with is just not, it's actually disincentivized. So it's really bad. It's really bad.
Yeah, I think it's important that you brought that up, the stupid versus evil kind of thing. As someone of the right who, has more predisposed, I guess, using those assumptions to assume the other side is stupid, I always found that to be really dangerous. Or because the assumption of stupid and evil, one's not, I would say maybe assuming the other person's stupid or at least ignorant is better than assuming they're evil, but neither of them are good assumptions to start out with. When I see people more conservative, or even people who are more on the right, or people against general, like the critical race theory stuff, if you just brush off Ibram Kendi and Robin DiAngelo as stupid people, you're making a mistake. Like, you can't just brush people off like that, because one, I've read Kendi and he's not a stupid person. I can tell you that. And when you just go on that assumption, you're going to make stupid arguments because that's how you fight stupid. It's like
And you're underestimating it too.
right.
You're underestimating its impact.
And that's a dangerous assumption. So, when you're engaging, your typical, let's say, right winger is engaging with your typical left winger on somewhere like Twitter, the right winger is going to call them stupid. The left winger is going to call the other person evil. Now, put yourself in a mindset where you see the other person's evil. If you see Donald Trump as evil, not only can you feel justified in saying, "I hope you die," or "I hope something bad happens to you," you almost morally must say that.
Yeah.
Right? That's how you fight evil. You have to slay the dragon. And if you don't, you almost feel morally bankrupt if you don't call on people, or if you don't wish bad things on evil people. So I think that's why you get this dynamic. And it's funny you say it's surprisingly unsurprising, right? That this is the response you get when you see Trump as Hitler 2.0. It's like you not only are you incentivized to think that way, you must think that way. And that's why it's also surprising when people call him racist. It's like, if you call him racist, then you should be going much harder than you are right now. But you don't actually think that because, it's just a convenient political trick. And then, of course, the same thing from the other side, when you're just assuming the person debating you is stupid. Well, you're going to give them very stupid responses and very stupid rebuttals, and it's not good for anyone. It's just going to hurt the discourse.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's an argument to be made that, like you said, if either you don't believe it or you're evil yourself. If you really think this person is all these things, then you really need to be a little bit more activated, probably, than someone is. If they're just tweeting out nonsense, and like the cheapening of words, especially words that we kind of reserve for really serious and important things, like racism, I think is the best example of it. Really, is by cheapening these words and by cheapening their meaning, we're losing the ability to really differentiate like really horrible things from to apply nuance to stuff, and that includes being able to recognize and categorize and describe things that are evil really bad when they're happening, right? So think about the response. Like, I would argue that one of the reasons why there is virtually no response from the public consciousness towards the Uyghur situation in China is because our last experience with the term concentration camp has been the idiotic notion that we have concentration camps on our border. Well, no one did anything about those because we don't have concentration camps on our border. But if you cheapen it and it's like, well, we now know, like, you don't actually respond you don't do anything. You just, do some name calling and that's about it. Then we're not going to, we've lost the ability as a, just a general society to go, wait a second. No, there are actual concentration camps in China. There needs to be action. The US and the West generally need to respond to this. This is evil. This is like, should not be happening ever, but especially now in like modern time, like, no, absolutely not. But we've cheapened that language. And so it's just, everything is just kind of flows in and out of itself to where, well, it means this, but it also means this really lighter version of it. And it makes where people that, they don't act, really one could say that Antifa in some ways are some of the most reasonably acting people in our society right now, because they're saying we believe that they're a fascist in power and we're doing something about it. That they could say, well, yeah, like, why aren't you doing it? Like, do you believe this? If you believe it and you're not with us, then you're actually more irrational than we are, because we are embodying the courage of our convictions, even if our convictions are stupid and misinformed and insane. But, the fact that if you do believe that, it does, kind of warrant action. That's that conviction thing that we've talked about. You could say that they really are acting in a logical way, in the same way that people who are, saying that, Donald Trump does need to die and stuff right now are acting very much, in line with their worldview and with their perspective, because it makes sense if you believe all these things, or at least you have convinced yourself that those things are true. And I think the last thing is, I remember my buddy Eric quite a while ago. I think it was maybe after Virginia Tech, whenever everyone was changing their ribbon to the the thing, and it was the thing was that you would change your Facebook profile picture to something to show that you support something. And my buddy Eric told me a term that he had heard that I thought was really good, and it stuck with me. And it was this idea of, call it slacktivism. It's where you just kind of put the slogan out there and that's it. And so I think really this idea of cheapening what it means to really respond to something, what it really does mean to believe something, and to respond appropriately to it, has probably been festering and growing and really kind of evolving over the last maybe decade and a half or so. But so if you think about that lens of where people kind of learned that the way that I respond to something is by just changing my Facebook profile picture or whatever, then all of this actually is a pretty natural outgrowth of that, of where the way that I respond to Virginia Tech and show that I care is by changing my picture to a ribbon. Well, the way that I show that I care and respond, and that I really, am meaningfully going to engage with the fact that I think we have a racist, Nazi, fascist dictator, is not necessarily to think that there is action required, and so by divorcing action from belief, people have been able to just say whatever thing without ever actually thinking what the consequences should be if they believe it, because they spent quite a while now saying, I can believe something without actually doing anything about it. And so again, all of this just kind of makes sense for them to respond the way they have. I don't know. There's kind of a lot there, but I don't know if that kind of makes sense.
Yeah, well, it makes sense. And there's a movie quote, and I can't remember the movie. You'll probably know because like every movie ever. But there's a quote in a movie. It's like every side that creates some sort of fighting force to fight against or for evil, like they always think they're fighting on the right side, and they always label their side freedom fighters. Like always the freedom fighters, but also the worst some of the worst atrocities that we don't know much about normally happening in places like Africa. Some of the worst atrocities there are created by groups who label themselves freedom fighters. And it's like that's because they have that moral conviction to say, whatever I'm doing, no matter how bad the atrocity really is, I'm doing it for the right reasons. And that's such a strong conviction. And that are the people on the Antifa side. And the people who, Biden, or, those types on the left who say, yeah, we are fighting fascism. Well, do they really think that? I don't think they think that, because Antifa aren't people. It's just an idea, right?
Yeah.
And once the people actually have the conviction to act on that idea, then they're not real people. It's just maybe hidden right wingers causing fires and whatever. And that really illuminates that conviction problem. It's like I say these empty words, but once people act on my words, I have to backtrack really hard.
Yeah.
And that was, I think, a highlight from the debate that is just being glossed over because of, again, Trump putting his foot in his mouth. He had a highlight there when it came to, and maybe it was Trump's antics that pulled it out of Biden and frustrated him to say Antifa is just an idea, because I think that is the single most egregious statement in the whole debate. And it
really
came
stupid,
shortly after the whole Proud Boys thing or whatever, which is interesting if you saw the video with them today with BLM in northern Utah or something like that. Well, the Proud Boys, real quick, the Proud Boys and the BLM sect in like northern Utah, I believe it was, had a joint press conference together to say that they denounced white supremacy. So like they got, and the head of the Proud Boys is a Cuban African, or Afro-Cuban, it's the silly things. I don't get stuck on that, but I mean, that's what's overshadowing, Biden's comment that Antifa is just an idea, because he just wants it to remain an idea. He does not want people to act on it. Once that idea becomes conviction, then really bad things happen. That's why you see police under attack, because when you label police as a racist institution, well, the people going out there and harming police officers, I mean, can you almost blame them?
Yeah.
I mean, if they think that these people are the racists, people who used to be contracted to wrangle up slaves back in the day, and they think it's the same institution, well, why wouldn't you have the conviction to actually act upon that idea?
Yeah.
And it's really sad to see when you see people forwarding it while also rejecting the violence coming from that side who are acting on those ideas, and it's really egregious.
Well, I mean, you see a really good example of this with Kamala Harris, whenever she's being interviewed by Colbert, and he's asking her about, you called Biden a racist. You were saying all these things, what he didn't say is that's a really serious thing. And you probably should only say it if you mean it. Now, he didn't say that, but that's kind of baked into that, to his credit. And, she's laughing. It was a debate. And so you kind of see that's just a really very clear window. It's a small window, but it's a clear window into just a total lack of regard that's put into these terms, and the amount of hyperbole that's just thrown around. And again, it cheapens it, and it makes it to where people aren't equipped to respond to actual evil. So whether it's like the Muslims, Uyghurs in China, for example, because they've been they're just, everything is that, and that's ultimately, I think it's going to work to their detriment, because I think this is something that Ben Shapiro said before, but so have many others, where they said, who's the happiest that regular conservatives are getting called Nazis and racists, or actual Nazis and racists, because the term is cheapened so much that they're like, yeah, we're all Nazis and racists, right, guys? Like, that doesn't mean anything. And so it's going to come back and bite them, because it's going to make it to where there are some really bad actors and some really egregious things that are going to go unnoticed, because it all just gets lumped together. So anyway, that's kind of my general take on it, is that this is just another example, another piece of evidence of kind of where we're at societally, especially in terms of just, again, that the fact that just dignity and grace and bipartisanship and common humanity have really fallen out of fashion, quite severely. And that this, unfortunately, is just one more example of it. And, the last thing I'll say, and we probably should kind of wrap it up, is, I do hope, if we're in the prediction game, everything, we kind of said, if he follows the trajectory of statistical odds, I do hope that the president is fine. And I do hope it does humble him in some ways. And, same with the first lady and all of them. We have to get back to a place where we see people as people and not filter everything through what their ideological lenses are. It's really gross that whenever people are assessing how they feel about something. One of my first videos I did, it's got to be over 2 years ago, was about illegal immigration. And I talked about movies and TV shows, and how the way in which we judge the actions of someone in a movie or a TV show are often based on how we already are told to feel about that character. So Dexter, we are told to feel that we like Dexter, so we filter everything through the lens of I already like Dexter. We don't look at their actually. So we look at their identity as, in relationship to us as the viewer, and judge it. Whereas Dexter's the bad guy in a show like NCIS, right? So we judge the NCIS. If he was in NCIS, we'd be rooting for the NCIS guys. And so, but I said we can't do that in real life. In real life, you can't judge people first with some predetermined thing of how you want to feel about them based on their identity, in some kind of subjective thing. We can't do that. And so what we're seeing right now is that people, whether it's you make a fact claim or a truth claim, or you make an argument, or you express an opinion, or something bad happens to you, or something good happens, or whatever, it's all getting filtered through what side are you on. And before I decide how I feel about what you said, or whether or not I think what you said is true, or whether or not I agree, or whether or not I disagree, or anything like that, it's first filtered through what team you're on. Like how have I kind of mapped the different tribal identities, and depending on where they fall, that's going to determine how I respond, and that creates really subjective applications of objective, human decency and principles, and just goodness and morality. And so it's such a dangerous place to be, and it's really depressing, to be honest. that's kind of where we're at right now. And again, it's not just agree, or it's not just disagree. It's like, well, if you're here, I'm just going to spin everything bad and I'm going to disagree with you, no matter what. And if something bad happens to you, I'm going to be like, well, yeah, ha ha ha. It's the other side too, where it's like, if I perceive you're on my team, then I'm going to find all the ways to justify what you say. I'm going to find all the ways to defend it, and I'm going to agree with you and just hope everything good, and just take, and both of them just to the nth degree of, some kind of either tribal animosity or tribal, familiarity or care or regard, whatever affinity. That was the word I was looking for. It's so unhealthy, man. So anyway, that's kind of my final thoughts. Whatever you got, and then we got to close it out.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I agree with everything you said. I don't think I have to repeat any of that. I think, we need to find the underlying cause of our willingness to proclaim people are evil, or to brush off people who are not in our tribe as the tribe who must be defeated. Because we are part of a tribe, and the tribe should be Americans, not left wingers and right wingers. We've subsetted this tribe out to different political ideologies rather than the founding ideology, which is what we should be focusing on. And I go back to this a lot, and it's when you lose something like religion, which is your kind of moral North Star, you start to kind of float around to whatever change on morality your subset is going to go into. So now we have no North Star. We have no founding idea that we're all, children of God, that we all should be looked at as human beings.
Yeah.
And although our actions might be bad, our actions could be evil, don't let that define the person. Instead of denouncing them as evil and wanting to hurt them, how about you reach out to them and want to help them? Yeah. That's what we should be trying to do. And because we kind of lost that North Star, I think, we're wandering around in the desert in the dark, and we're latching on to ideologies, we're latching on to our side, and it's splitting the country into two countries. So
yeah,
we need to find a way to get back to the North Star. We need to find a way to start looking at each other, like you said, like human beings, and find a way to bridge the gap rather than widen it. Like we're trying to burn down the bridge between each other instead of trying to build a super highway between each other. And that's really what we need to focus on. So
yeah, I totally agree, man. It's and by the way, I'll say this, and I really do have to go. It's okay for there to be tribal subsets within the country, right? That's okay. People can have different affiliations. One of the best, most hopeful stories of humanity was the fact that people learned that just because, it's not zero sum. It's not just about power, which is what we're returning back to with that kind of loss of meaning. But it's, we can be on different teams and still collaborate. We can have different ideological perspectives, still collaborate. And that's what sports are, right? Like, do you think everyone on any given team votes the same way, or has the same religious beliefs? Oh, of course not. So the point is, we can have these different things and still work together, really in a really meaningful way, and form strong bonds, and conquer mutual challenges, and have debates over disagreements and stuff. We can still do that in a way that's, I know civil is the word that comes to my mind, but even that's been kind of overplayed and kind of cheapened. I guess just decent. We can do that. It's not about, we all have to hold hands and sing Kumbaya. It's about, even if my side's holding hands and your side is holding hands, and we're singing different songs, we can still work together whenever we have to, and acknowledge, that we are in this together, and that we are all human. Okay. Is there anything else, Kevin, that you can think of?
No, that was great.
Okay. Everyone, please, you know the drill by now, the thing, but I'll put all the links to Kevin's content. Please go check him out, Engineering Politics. It's on Twitter, ENG_politics, on engineeringpolitics.locals.com, is where his community is really great. Like you mentioned, he's been doing these book reviews. I think you're done with How to Be an Anti-Racist now, aren't you? And so
I am officially an anti-racist. I've graduated.
Okay,
I have my diploma in the back. Yeah.
Well, there you go. Well, it's a lifelong process, so let's not get over our skis here. But anyway, but either way, he's put a lot of really interesting content on there. He's got some interesting interviews that he has done and he's going to be doing in the future here. So check that out, please, on his YouTube, Engineering Politics. And then he has his own website, engineeringpolitics.com. He's also on ThinkSpot. Did I leave anything else out?
Other than Parlor, but that's
Parlor.
kind of assumed.
I had that in my mind,
now.
But I'm like, whatever. Anyway, so for my end, if this kind of thing you're into, please follow me on Twitter. That's at My Mundane Mind, and join my locals community. That's returntoreason.locals.com. Same with YouTube, obviously, Return to Reason, Medium, ThinkSpot, all of those other places, Spotify, so on and so forth. Kevin, this is fun. As always, we're going to probably try to do something, hopefully, for the vice presidential debate. We'll see. We'll iron all that out. But I guess that's it, man. Is that it?
Good on you, man. We're good.
All right. Thanks, everyone, for watching, and we will check you next time. Peace.
Bye.